I'm taking this very seriously. If you could please step up. This is how I learn. Just let it sink in. Today we're taking it back to the city that never seems to stop making tires, because that's where every company makes tires in the United States of America. We're taking it back to Akron, Ohio, which is, in Ohio, there's like 3 really exciting things to do, 3 of which all encompass tires or tire manufacturing. We're taking it back to the town, the city, the area, the person that decided to create a tire business because he was an entrepreneur and he just wanted to make a lot of money. Today we're gonna be talking about none other than BF Goodrich. So BFG stands for Benjamin Franklin Goodrich, and back in 1870, he founded the idea in Akron, Ohio. Now, if I'm saying Akron correctly or Akron or Acorn, I might just interchange them every once in a while, but you get the point. It's a city in Ohio. They make lots of tires, and that's pretty much about it. In fact, if you didn't know, Akron, Ohio is the tire capital of the world, and he was one of the first people to produce a factory in the town to start the BFG name. Back in 1870, BFG started off by making rubber hoses that would actually be used for fire hoses and a lot of different other things like rubberized balls and other small rubber grommets and different things that you would need at the time. It wasn't until a few years later that they actually decided to get into rubber tire manufacturing, just as most companies do, because there was a growing market for it. Now, a lot of these tire businesses are essentially established around the same time, the early 1900s. In fact, a lot of them were formed in the late 1800s because of the fact that the whole automobile industry was actually taking off at that time. There was a lot of people that were deciding to make the jump either from carriages or to cars, and not a lot of people actually had any faith when it came to carriages or cars, and everybody was just like, neither of them are gonna last long. Probably just stick to horses, that's what we're known for. And well, you know, BFG was one of those companies that was gonna kind of take a risk on both. By getting into the rubber automotive and non-automotive industry by making hoses and things like that, they were able to essentially gain capital that was gonna work for the company, and it allowed them to have a foundation so that they could start getting into tires if the automobile industry was actually going to take off. But BFG didn't have it all easy back in the day. In fact, they were actually pretty close to closing the old doorskis in the first decade of being in business. They rebounded back in the 1880s, and into the 1890s is when they really began to grow. And just like most companies that are getting into a different sort of business that they don't have a lot of idea about, it does take time to either get it rolling or end up closing the doors. BFG was able to survive because of the fact that they got involved in making different rubberized grommets and just overall having a better mentality than a lot of other competitors at the time. And there were quite a few. You had companies like Uniroyal, you had companies like Goodyear and Firestone and General Tire all trying to make a buck while competing with BF Goodrich. But the BFG name essentially got established, and from there they knew that if there's anything that they were gonna have to do is gonna have to grow with the technology of other companies coming out at the time. If you think about it, the automobile industry was relatively pretty fundamental, especially when you got into the discussion about carriages and different motorized systems to help push some wheels along some roads with people inside them. Back in the day, that was pretty much the most progressive thing you could get to, and if you look at cars then versus cars now, there's quite a bit of difference. BFG essentially established a research center right in the beginning of the late 1800s so that they could get started by keeping up with the technology that was ultimately following this really cool motorized horsey, non-horsey carriage system thing that they were calling the automobile. In fact, it was doing so well that BFG essentially became the tire partner for, you know, the one guy, you've heard of him, Henry Ford, and the Model A. But cars weren't the only thing that were really taking off in the early 1900s. That's a pun. I would be excited, but I'm tired as all hell, so I'm just gonna explain it like I would if I was Clarence. Wow, that was really mean. I'm so sorry, Claire. The aeroplane. You're looking at aeronautics, or what the word is, aeronautics. Aeronautics. Airplanes were taking off, literally and figuratively, in the early 1900s, and there was a lot of demand and technology behind them. Most importantly were the actual tires that were going on these airplanes. A lot of the time, people were using downforce and things like that to essentially slow down the airplane when it came down to it when they were landing and, of course, taking off. But tires at the time were very fundamental and didn't provide the traction and necessary grip for, you know, the planes to essentially land and take off safely. So BFG really spent a lot of time in the early 1900s, the 1910s and 1920s, perfecting tires for the aerospace division. Because, I mean, if you look at it now, it's a pretty big department, and it was just another thing that the research department of BFG was trying to do so that they could make tires and other sort of rubber stuff that you would need to just be a business in the early 1900s. BFG was getting involved in other things besides just tires. In fact, they were breaking records in 1914 and 1950. They won 2 successful Indy 500 races using their tires. It was the first time a company had ever done that. Not only that, but they were getting involved in creating suits for high altitude flights and other things that were helping the aerospace, aeronautic division. I might still be saying that wrong, and I'm sure the comments will let me know, just like I said odd wrong or epitome. Those are 2 words. All right, sorry. I make mistakes every once in a while. Can you just give a man a break, okay? You can tell me in person, actually, because we'll be doing a meet and greet on Tuesday at SEMA, 4 o'clock in the outside AccuAir booth. If you guys want to come by and say hi, that is the only plug that we have at this time. But yeah, 4 o'clock, which is not Central Standard Time. I think it's like Western Standard. I don't even know what they do over there. It's like 2 hours early. 4 o'clock, Tuesday, AccuAir booth. We'll see you there. And if that's not enough, a BFG scientist actually invented vinyl back in the late 1920s. It was something that was iconic, and it's something that we use still to this day. A lot of the BFG history from the 1920s to the 1960s is littered with history. It's littered with success. In fact, BFG was one of the first tire companies to actually introduce the tubeless tire, which, if you really think about it, when we bring up tire companies, there are always companies that like say that they invented it, but they really didn't, or like they created a version of it, or like an adaptation. BFG was actually the first one to really actually do it. And from there, a lot of their success took off across every different market, whether it was airplanes, cars, or just synthetic rubber. They introduced synthetic rubber as an option for their product, and it was something that allowed them to stay current still to this day. First tubeless tire is still a system that we use to this day as well, and BF Goodrich has essentially grown into that in the current day and age as being one of the most active and currently technology research developmentally inducing, creative, exciting companies. None of those words make sense at all, but if I just keep saying them, I'm hoping that you forget it. I said some of them, that they're just really trying hard to stay relevant and to stay on top of the game, because as you know, there's tons of companies out there right now that are introducing all sorts of crazy tires out there that last forever, that never, have any sort of tread wear, that don't have any sort of age or don't dry rot and things like that. And BFG is doing the same thing, except they've been doing it pretty much since they've been in business. And in 1988, BFG was acquired by Michelin Tire, and now they sit underneath that umbrella and they're partnered and all that good stuff, which means a whole lot of different things. But in terms of like a whole, if you wanted to know, the tire manufacturing industry as a macro is actually held onto by a very few select companies, depending on what you look at out there. So there's a lot of companies that you may not like and you may love, and you'd be surprised to find out that they're actually owned by the same people, kind of like Axe and Dove. Everybody hates Axe because it's a man wash, but then they love Dove because it's all about female empowerment and that sort of stuff, and that's super cool. But they're ran by the same company. It's the same, almost the same marketing. It's weird. I don't get it. You guys don't get it. We don't get it. You probably don't get it in the comments, but BFG is now underneath that name, but that hasn't stopped them from continuously growing. And in the early 2000s, BFG got involved in truck tires, which they were one of the first ones to introduce a 24-inch tire. If you didn't know, that was around the same time that Nitto was getting involved in the truck market, and when they came out with the Dune Grappler, Mud, all that sort of stuff. And so this was BF Goodrich's answer to essentially combat that and put them in the market as well. Ever since the beginning, BF Goodrich has been a company that's been involved in a lot of different things. They've been involved in the car race and have done very well. They were doing the Indy 500 and they were doing very well. They're involved in airplanes and this and that and everything in between. And even though they were acquired by Michelin, they're still a great company and they still make some really good tires. If you go out there to pick up a set of BF Goodriches for pretty much anything, there's really not a whole lot of bad out there. Now, every single wheel company or tire company has their specialty, but in terms of BF Goodrich, they really aren't a slouch by any means. And the best part about them is they're not like the super high-end, super expensive tire. They are a great price point for what you're getting for the value, which in case you're somebody like me, it's really hard to spend a ton of money on tires when you plan on trying to break them down over time and just do burnouts and things like that, you're not gonna be necessarily very nice to your tires to begin with. BF Goodrich is a great brand, and if you're looking for history on something that was just here in the Americas, in the good old tire capital world of Akron, Ohio, BF Goodrich is your tire. And at the same time, they have a lot of history. They're one of those companies that just has always been relevant, and they don't seem to be going away anytime soon. In terms of fluctuations, they really don't have any because the company has just done well. They don't have a big up and down and sweep side to side because, well, they've never had to. So if you guys are interested in picking up some BFGs, you can actually check out the links below or look at fitmentindustries.com. We have wheels, tires, suspension, airlift, Eibach, silvers, Tane, all of that sort of stuff. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe so we can keep making awesome videos like this. But I'm Alex from Fitment Industries, and if you're still here, SEMA, Tuesday, 4 o'clock, meet and greet. I won't have a headache probably at that time unless we go out Monday night, which I'm not gonna do because that's the responsible thing to do. Alex from Fitment Industries. Peace.